In other news this evening, the clean-up and the questions. Unions insist they will press on with future demonstrations despite the violence. And police charge a taxi driver with the murder of Sean O'Callaghan and say a second body discovered is that of a woman aged between 23 and 30.
This is Sky News with Anna Botting, Andrew Wilson and Jeremy Thompson.
Good evening from Tripoli. Top story on Sky News at 6. Libyan rebels have made dramatic advances today, capturing 4 towns as they make a big push towards the west of the country. Among them, 2 key oil complexes of Ras Lanuf and Brega, responsible for a large part of Libya's oil trade. Rebel leaders are now even talking about beginning their own oil exports within a week. Anti-government forces claim they have won control of towns even further west of that. The small town of Bin Jawad, they continue this momentum towards Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown and his major stronghold. Sky's Ever Heard's been following that rebel push west and sent this report from Ras Lanuf.
The rebels' advance is gathering pace now, and they're taking territory without even having to fight. This is the oil town of Brega, taken by Gaddafi's forces 2 weeks ago, and now back in rebel hands. Thanks to Sarkozy's airstrikes, this place was free when we got here, this rebel said. There was no battle. But still, they're claiming this as their victory. Gaddafi, we're coming, they shout.
What do you think your chances are now of going to Tripoli to remove Gaddafi?
100%, we are sure. We'll remove him. We don't accept him president again. Never.
We head on west, still unsure how far the government forces have retreated, but every place we pass seems to be controlled by the opposition. They tell us the route ahead is safe. We move on, passing the oil terminal of Ras Lanuf, the biggest in Libya, and then reach the town itself.
Bye-bye, Gaddafi.
This place was fought over for weeks because of its strategic value. Gaddafi's forces, using rockets from North Korea, delivered under the label of bulldozer parts. But here too, the rebels are in control now, the government's defences crushed. Airstrikes force Gaddafi's troops to retreat from here, but they are still further beyond the town here of Ras Lanuf, so there could be a fight ahead for the rebels as they try to sweep west. The next challenge for the rebels is the town of Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, just over 100 miles from here. This war to topple him is moving west towards his strongholds now. Emma Heard, Sky News, Ras Lanuf.
Well, to give you more of the mood over in the rebel-held eastern half of the country, let's cross to Andrew Wilson, my colleague, in the recently recaptured rebel town of Anjdabir. Andrew.
Jeremy, thanks very much indeed. Yes, indeed, and how swift that recapturing was. It didn't have much to do with the rebel fighters. It was all to do with the coalition jets targeting Gaddafi's tanks here in Anjdabir, and then they fled. And from what we're gathering now, all the way through Ras Lanuf, Bin Jawad perhaps, Brega certainly, the Gaddafi forces have pulled back, which points them towards that next stronghold for Gaddafi, the city of Sirte. That's the direction they're going in. Let's check on how far they've actually gone and pick up with our security editor, Sam Kiley, who's with those rebels heading west. Sam, good to talk to you. How far have the rebels got and how far have you got?
Well, we all got about 60 kilometres from Sirte itself, Gaddafi's hometown, as you say, and there was a bizarre incident, rather clever piece of a tactical ambush, essentially, by Gaddafi's people on the advanced elements of the rebels. What they'd done is bring some busloads of young men saying that they were people that they wanted to hand over to the east, young men from the east who'd been having a hard time in the West because they were being accused of being rebel sympathizers and so on. These young men may or may not have been legitimate, but what happened was that just as the first bus was being moved into the rebel-held territory, over the hill brow behind us, behind the buses, came about 30 vehicles and a lot of men armed with small arms and indeed the sort of anti-aircraft cannon you can see being moved behind me, Andrew, and they opened up on the rebels and on us, so we had to bug out, and we've withdrawn a certain safe distance now. We're at Benjawad, which is still at least unoccupied by Gaddafi's people, and the rebels are still here. Rebels have set up some blocks, but what was striking really during that apparent ambush, well, it was a real ambush, was that the rebels ran. They didn't open fire, not even with their heavy weapons. They did have some anti-aircraft cannon of the sort you can see behind me, which would have been extremely effective against a party of infantry and mounted in vehicles such as we saw. And in fact, they didn't do anything. They just ran along with us. So there's definitely not as much vim in the rebel advance as we had assumed. They had travelled about 100 miles down the road at least towards because of the airstrikes, but now that the airstrikes are no longer on and Gaddafi seems to have switched tactics, so his people have, are now using infantry rather than very heavy weapons, and of course the infantry are much less vulnerable to attack from above.
Indeed, Sam. Thanks very much indeed, Sam Kiley there in Binjawad now, heading west towards the Gaddafi stronghold of Sirte. Well, it really was swift. If you think back to last Friday and Saturday when Gaddafi's tanks made their way into Benghazi, and then the coalition finally made up its collective mind to take out those tanks, that was what Libyans in the east here regard as a seriously narrow escape. The tanks withdrew to Astra, where I am now, and then further coalition strikes, headed by RAF Tornadoes, drove them even further back, and this city is now, as far as everyone here is concerned, liberated. I went down into the town earlier on today to take a look around to get an idea of the picture of how this battle for Ashdabia actually took place. Well, the battle for Ashdabia was swift and fierce, there's no doubt about that, but it's much more to do with the RAF actions from above than it is anything to do with the rebel fighters here. That's a 60-ton tank. The rebels haven't got anything that can throw that on its back that easily. Here's where the turret landed. These are the eastern gates to the city, the closest bit of Ashdabia to Benghazi. The road actually swings past the city, heading west. And it's important to remember, it wasn't Ashdabia itself that was important to Gaddafi's forces, it was the access, the road to Benghazi. When Gaddafi's troops came here, the people fled for their lives. This isn't Misrata or Zawiya, where the population can stand and fight and hold out. It's too small for that. And also people were fearful that Gaddafi's troops would sweep through here and head on to Benghazi, leaving them on the wrong side. But they're starting to come home again now. We're moving out towards the western side of the city now, and there's more evidence of the RAF strikes. This gives you an idea of what a brimstone missile can do, fired from a tornado high up above. Here's a T-72, old Russian-made tank. And again, this has taken a direct hit. You see the turret's been lifted completely off. You might wonder why Colonel Gaddafi's soldiers didn't flee earlier. Well, we gather that a certain general with a brutal reputation, Abdul Qasim Ibrahim al-Ganga, was sent here after establishing a pretty brutal reputation fighting in the south on the border with Chad, to make sure that the soldiers didn't run away. In the event, he's been captured, we believe now held in Benghazi, and his soldiers did indeed run away. And look how poorly positioned these tanks are. They're out in the open, right by a main road, no attempt to give them any kind of cover. We're assuming that most of the crews didn't sleep or hang around near their vehicles too long. Look, here's another one, right out in the open. But as far as the RAF spotters are concerned, they're sitting ducks.